Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Own It. We are going to be talking about an ownership mentality, definitely a topic that I am passionate about, first of all, as a leader, but also as a business owner, and just something that's definitely ingrained in my DNA. So we are so grateful to have all of you here today. We know that you all have busy schedules, and so taking the time out to grow and learn and develop and invest in yourself and invest in your team members is definitely something to be not taken lightly. So thank you again for your time. So just a couple of things before we get started here, a few housekeeping things that I'd like to share with you. So we typically have poll questions, and we ask you to jump in, answer those relatively quickly so that we can collect the data, and we'll talk about the results. And so when you see those pop up, please jump in and vote. One of the other things that I wanted to share with you are the 3 books that we have on Amazon. The first book is called Stand Out. Stand Out is built on self-leadership. The second book is called Dare to Make a Difference, and it is built on team leadership. And the third book is Bottom Line, and it is built on organizational leadership. These books are built to be standalone, or were created and written to be standalone, or they can go in the sequence and the series that you see here. Now, these books are a little bit different from most of your leadership books in the sense that we don't encourage you just to sit down and read them cover to cover. In fact, each of them are what we call a 33-day journey. And what we encourage you to do is read the daily entry and do the activities that go with that day before moving on to the next day. And the purpose of this is to create new neurological pathways, new patterns, new habits, new ways of doing things. Because unfortunately, so many of us, including myself, we read a great book or we go to a great, training, and then all that information goes on the shelf and we don't start using it. So this book was built definitely to create those new neurological pathways, a lot like coaching does. That gives us long-term accountability. One of the other things that I want to share with you here, we are at the beginning of 2018, and we are so excited about the new things that are coming. We have Facebook Live that we're going to be doing every month, so we're making a shift. Instead of doing webinars, we are going to be doing Facebook Live, so be watching for more information on that. Join us on those, or if you're not able to join it live, you can always watch the recordings afterwards. Also, a couple of other new things before I introduce our wonderful guests that we have here today. We are having millennial coaches that are going to be a part of our team now. I'm super excited about that. These millennial coaches are millennials themselves. They are also certified coaches. They've been through an International Coaching Federation certified program. And so they are going to be coaches to other millennials, but also coaches to more seasoned leaders, executive leaders who are working with millennials. So we know some millennials are already in more senior leadership positions than others. So to have another millennial coach can be beneficial to them, but also for other leaders who may be not 100% sure how to best work with the millennials in their organization or on their teams. So hopefully you can check that out, and there's a whole lot more coming. So just check your newsletter in January for that. So at this time, I'd like to take a moment to introduce to you Joanne Auger. Joanne and I we go back 10 years now, and it has been a wonderful journey working with her, learning from her, exploring all kinds of different leadership and coaching experiences together. She is an executive and leadership coach. She is also our master coach and trainer here at MSBCoach. And Joanne, it is always awesome to be able to share this space with you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm excited about being here, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for everyone. And my name is Michelle Braden, and I am the CEO and president here at MSBCoach. So with that, I am going to pass the baton to you, Joanne, and we'll just hit the ground running with our webinar today called Own It.
Yes. Michelle and I have talked a good bit about this particular webinar, what we wanted to present. And, Michelle, you've been around people who just own it, right?
Yes.
And you've been around people that do not.
Right?
So we're going to define part of that. So let's take a look at what I hope we can cover in the next hour together.
Yeah, and it is interesting how for some people it seems to be more natural to take ownership than others, but I think regardless, it can be learned.
Absolutely. So here are some things we are going to cover with our time together. First of all, we're going to define what it means to own it, and why it's important. And we're going to talk about the importance and connection of values and vision to owning it as well. And of course, one thing we always do here at MSB is that we're going to present some strategies and hopefully some things for you to take a look at, and not only from the leadership perspective, but also from an employee perspective as well, with this thing called owning it. We're going to talk about how personal accountability builds or weakens ownership. And then we're going to talk about how do you build a culture of owning it, because that culture is so important to not only defining what ownership is, but also bringing in the right people and people willingly joining in this ownership culture.
Awesome. And I will say on that, I know we are not even taking the deep dive into that, but I was just talking with some clients yesterday about this. And even if your overall organizational culture is not one of ownership, which, hopefully you can influence that and impact that, but what can you do to influence even your own department within the organization, that it can have this sort of a mentality?
Well, let's get into the definition of ownership. But before we move to that, Michelle, I want to talk about what I consider some worrisome statistics. We follow the Gallup organization and their studies. I think one of the most important studies they've ever done is on employee engagement. And they started that in 2000 and continue to do that every 2 years. And it's amazing some of the things that have come out of that study of employee engagement. So here's some stats that I want us all to take a look at. The first one is 51%, and 51% is at any given time, according to Gallup, you will have that number, 51%, listen to that, Michelle,
wow,
of people who are not engaged in their work.
We could just stop right there and be pretty depressed.
Yeah. And then at any given time, 17% and closer to 18% of employees are actively disengaged. Now, often people will ask us, right, well, what's the difference between disengaged and actively disengaged? And the way I talk about that is the disengaged, which is generally 51% of people at any given time, are people who show up pretty much, average attendance. They give average work, but there's no discretionary work that goes on.
Well, we call transactional,
right?
Transactional work in the sense of I'm coming in, I'm doing a job, you give me a paycheck, I go away. But there's no commitment and
task
ownership.
Given, right? Mediocre. It's a paycheck mentality, right? That 17.5% are what I refer to onboard terrorists sometimes.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are, that are constantly the ones that people are complaining about, or they're complaining. There's always something wrong, who actively disengage from the work. And not only try to, not necessarily stay under the radar, because I want to point out, there are those who are actively disengaged who stay under the radar, but there's those who are actively disengaged who are above the radar and are just there to create chaos and confusion.
And trying to pull people over to their side. Yeah, influencing to the negative.
Yeah, so I'm not a great mathematician, but that's close to 69% of your employees at any given time. And I don't know, here at MSB, we can't afford that.
Right.
We need fully engaged. We're a small organization. We need fully engaged people. So what does that leave you? Well, it usually, according to Gallup, is that about 33% of your employees at any given time are going to be what they call engaged employees.
Yeah. And I know, and we're not showing these stats, but the difference between engaged and even actively engaged,
Right.
which is what we're hoping to help you establish here, in today's webinar is that spirit of ownership is actively engaged.
Yes.
It's a whole different level.
Yes. And I think you may have figured out where we're going with this. One of the things that really helps people become actively engaged is owning it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, Michelle, about, the cost.
Okay.
I mean, take a look at this number here. What that number is stating is that it costs an average company approximately $10,000 every time they have an employee that either goes away or not doing their job. That $3,400 is the amount that any given day a company could lose.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you multiply all of that times just the employees of the U.S., that in the U.S. there is a loss of $350 billion every year.
Goodness.
Because of lack of engagement. I don't know. My question to you, Michelle, is can we afford that?
Yeah. Well, and across the board, it's interesting, and I'm not saying it's not important to spend money on technology. It definitely is. But I think we get the scales out of balance a bit when we think about these sort of dollars and these sort of money, and how this is impacting the bottom line.
Right.
Yeah. And so doesn't it make sense for us to spend time first and foremost ourselves understanding this and creating ownership in ourselves, but then also because we've got to have ownership mentality ourselves as leaders before anyone on our team is going to have
Absolutely. And a great segue, because I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you remember getting your first car, buying it yourself? Do you remember that?
I do. Yes. I bought all my cars I've ever had, which I can still count on one hand because we believe in driving them till the wheels fall off. But yeah, I do.
Yeah. And what was that feeling of owning your own car?
Yeah. I remember the first few cars I had probably weren't anything beautiful to brag about, but I remember the first car that I bought, and it was still used, but I was really proud of that car. And, keeping it so clean and waxing it and, not wanting, I didn't have a garage, so I even bought a car cover to put over it. And by the way, it wasn't even a real nice car, but it was nice to me. It was the nicest car I had ever had. And so, yeah, just a whole different mentality when I owned it.
Right. Yeah, I'm like you. My car certainly did not look like the one we have on the screen,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
But there is something to be said, about when that buying something that you've worked hard for or owning something that you've worked very hard for. So what does that have to do with owning things at work? I want us to take a look at this, and I want us to talk about how that feeds across every day showing up for work and what that looks like, the pride that you had maybe with your first purchase of a home or first purchase of a car, whatever that was, that pride that you had in that. How does that translate from that to showing up for work every day? So I want to talk about a couple of the definitions before we get too deep into this. The first definition that you will see of what owning something means is it's experiencing and the possessing and being psychologically tied to something. Now, let's go back to the car. You possessed that car, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. As soon as I saw that word psychologically tied, because that car I was telling you about, I drove that car for years. And when I did finally sell it and I got another car, again, that it wasn't brand new, but it was a whole lot newer. I was so psychologically tied to the other car because that was my first nice car that I had bought and owned. And I remember before we sold the other car, I was still continuing to drive it, even though I had the much, much newer one, because I was psychologically tied to it.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you own something, you experience a feeling of possessing, and you're also psychologically tied to it. And then owning is not just a cognitive thing, but it's also effective. It's just being able to say something is mine. When we say something is mine, it suggests an emotional connection.
Yeah. And boy, I'm already seeing, the connection of, like we're talking about a car or a house, something tangible, but we can have ownership in thought processes, ideas. Yeah, so much more when we own it. Okay, I don't want to jump ahead of you, but I get excited when I start seeing this.
Yeah, so all this is important, but you may be saying, well, that's a nice story about a car and ownership, but how is this all important? So studies show that personal ownership is desired by many employees. And there have been recent studies of how employees that connects directly to engagement. When one of the studies that Gallup did when they were interviewing engaged and actively engaged employees, one of the words that kept coming up in their interviews is employees would say something like this: well, I get to own a piece of it. I get to own that project. Ownership is desired by employees. And one of the other things that they found out is that when people feel like they own something, it improves their job satisfaction. And if you notice that word happiness,
yeah,
is that they become more happy and content at work because they're owning something.
And that's one of the things that we hear so much. And I know we have people from all over the world who tune into these, but here in the American culture, so much about happiness and the happiness factor. And so job satisfaction and actually being happy. It's, satisfaction is one level, happiness is a whole nother level.
Yes. And another thing is that when there is ownership, it improves work behavior. It not only in just the performance at work, but the organizational citizenship. Is that you're not just owning your job that you come in, but you own what the company stands for. You see yourself as part of that.
Yeah, the whole bigger picture, no matter how big or small your job is.
One of the things I found fascinating when I was getting ready for this webinar is that one study suggested that ownership triggers a mindset of possession. Now remember, that's a psychological definition of ownership, that when there is a mindset of possession and it persists not over just that job, but in other areas. Now, that is very helpful when you have an employee who not only owns theirs, but they care about what others are doing and how they're doing and how they're representing the company.
Yeah.
So it's not just a job, it is a sense of the culture of the organization.
Yeah. I always find it interesting, Joanne, because we travel a lot. We go into a lot of other organizations, literally physically into their buildings and into their properties. And so I find it interesting. I'm going to just share a simple thing, but going into the restroom and how neat, not because there's been a quote unquote janitor in there or a cleaning person in there, but when you're seeing, even employees, I've seen them pull off a couple extra paper towels and wipe off the countertop. That's not quote unquote their responsibility, but they're taking a sense of ownership, a sense of pride. And so that's why I think just to layer on that, you start seeing it at all levels.
That's a great example, by the way, Michelle. Thanks for that. That's a really good example because I've seen that. And then the last point is it not only just impacts your work life, but it impacts your personal life. Is that there is not only a sense of organizational ownership, but also what's around you. Employees who own their work at their place of employment also own things outside of, like volunteering and being part of their community.
And part of that, just building on that, is because we are holistic. And so when we take on a certain mentality in the workplace, it is going to impact our personal life.
Right.
And so just like when we jump back up here to satisfaction and happiness, when we have that in the workplace, which, by the way, you're spending 8+ hours a day there, how important is that satisfaction and happiness? And then how important is that and meaningful to know that that overspills into the rest of our lives, so other people get to benefit from that as well outside of the workplace.
Yeah. Well, I have a question that I'd like for our folks who are tuned in today to respond to.
All right, guys, so here's what I was talking about. We're going to take this poll. I'm going to launch it and share it with you. So, Joanne, do you mind reading that question out loud?
Be glad to. When was the last time there was a discussion of the mission vision at your organization?
So if you can jump in there and answer, was it less than a month ago, 6 months ago, more than a year, or what mission and vision? All right, so we'll take about 5 more seconds. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in and taking that. I'm going to close it. Great. Thanks.
Well, I'm encouraged. There's a few that actually say that they've had a discussion in the last month. I really, and usually, in quite fairness, oftentimes at the end of the year and the beginning of the year, you hear more of those discussions, and then it's put away and not mentioned again. So I'm hoping that's not the case, but and excuse my skepticism, but that's when we do see. And then I see some with that 6 months ago that, we'd like to see that a little bit more often. And we're going to talk about why that's important. And then, unfortunately, we have some like, I have no idea. It's never talked about.
So thank you all for jumping in and sharing that. And now I'm assuming, Joanne, you're going to tell us why
that's
so
right.
important.
So the first big step in owning it is to connect yourself first as the leader to the mission and vision of your organization. If we don't know what the mission and vision of our company is, and if we don't buy into that, and if we don't own it, it impacts across the board. It impacts how we do our job. It impacts whether we show up or not. It impacts discretionary energy. It impacts, what we do and what we don't do in our job. So mission and vision is extremely important because that is kind of the catalyst for everybody to we're all in this together. We're moving toward this vision and this is our mission. So if you don't have one, get one.
And the thing is, we work with our team members and encourage the people who we work with not only to have a mission and vision for the organization and make sure that that is communicated clearly and often because it can be forgotten about, but for each of the people on your team, including yourself, to have your own mission and vision statement, and then to understand. I don't want to disalign us here from what we're actually talking about, but it's important that you understand how your mission statement personally aligns with the organization's mission statement, because I would dare say without that alignment, there's not going to be a mentality of ownership.
Correct. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So if you don't, first step, if there's not one, get one. And as Michelle said, is that you should have one for yourself as well. And then the next one is communicate it often. Now, what I mean by that is you just don't put up a banner or you don't send out an email every week. Remember the mission and vision. It needs to be communicated in a way that is innovative, new, and different. It should be subtly under all the things that go out from, if you're the leader, that come out of your office, come out of your email. It should be a ongoing conversation. And one of the ways you do that is to have ongoing feedback about how are we living out our mission and vision. Where do we see it every day? Where are we not living it out? And we need to. So it needs to be communicated, and it needs to be talked about.
And I think, Joanne, taking it from, thinking of the funnel effect from the big to the small of, no matter how large or small your organization is, here is our mission and vision statement. And then here's how our department, plays into it. And here's how you individually play into it. And you being able to articulate that yourself as a leader, and then helping your team members to
Right.
articulate that.
And as a leader, you need to ask each of your employees, each of your team members to commit to living and working the mission and vision of the organization. And by the way, you need to show yours. People should never question if the leader buys into their own mission and vision or the mission and vision of the organization. You need to show yours.
That's funny, Joanne. I didn't mean to get the cart before the horse. That you were about to share this. But yes, I'm a strong advocate of that.
Yes. So let's talk about some additional steps that can help with ownership. The first one is, involve everyone in goal setting and planning. That is so important. Oftentimes what we would see, Michelle, and I know you'll agree with this, like the leadership will close themselves off in a room, and they'll set the goals and plan for the year, and then they make the announcement.
Yeah, for themselves and everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
If you really want your folks to own, involve them. That doesn't, nothing is more exciting, man. When I worked for an organization, a very large organization, nothing excited me more than to be invited in with a leadership to be asked, well, what do you think about this? I remember looking back at those days of feeling like, wow, they do value my opinion. And by the way, you're setting these goals and planning for the very people that you want to execute them, execute those goals and the task. Then why not involve them in the planning?
Right. And that involvement, of course, equates to ownership. The difference between something just being given to you, whether it's a car, a house, or a goal, and the difference between you actually rolling up your sleeves and being a part and a contributor to that. There's a whole different level of ownership than when someone's just told. It goes back to the thing that we, the transactional versus transformational.
Yeah.
In ownership.
So I want to go ahead and kind of get through all of these, and then we're going to dig into each one of them. The next one we'll be talking about in a second is, don't forget to explain the why, and then let them choose the how. And you may be like, what does that mean? Let them choose the how. We'll talk about that. Delegate authority, not just work. And trust before you have to. That's always an interesting one that people are like, what? How do I trust before I have to? Encourage your employees to problem solve, and then give constant constructive feedback. And then the last one we'll talk about is acknowledge. So, Michelle, let's dig into those. We talked about the goal setting. One more thing I want to mention about goal setting is that oftentimes what happens is that we take last year's goals and last year's plan and tweak it a little bit. This is where involving your employees to take a look at those goals and take a look at those plans and see where we missed the mark, where we were on mark, what are they seeing out there, could be so inspiring. You want to talk about ownership? It's when you say, hey, folks, take a look at this. Where did we miss the mark? Where do we need to go next year? What did we do well? Involve them in that. And then the next one that I want to dig into is explaining the why. Oftentimes we issue our edicts of these are our goals, these are our plans, this is how you're going to do it, and we don't explain the why behind it. People need to understand why we do what we do and why it's important. Now, some of us, and I've had leaders say, really, if they can't figure it out, they don't need to be here. Well, keep in mind, is that oftentimes employees do not see at the 30,000 foot level that you do as the CEO or head of the department or being in charge of whatever. They don't see that. What they see is the task in front of them. And they don't know the connection to the next thing. So if you want engagement, explain the why behind the goals. Explain the why behind the new procedures or the new vision. Explain that why.
Yeah, and if you want to dig a little deeper into that, I would recommend Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And he's also, if you're not a big reader, there's some great TED Talks and YouTube videos out there along that if you want to take a deeper dive.
Yeah. And then the next one is allow people to choose the how. You know, how. Here's what we need to accomplish this year. Excuse me. What better way to find out how you need to do something than the very people who need to figure that out and execute on it. So allow people to figure out the how. You can set your guidelines, you can set your boundaries, you can give, this is our budget, this is where we can go and have to stop, but let your folks figure out that how.
Joanne, I love this picture because to me, this just speaks volumes of critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too often we don't give people the space. They're smart, but we don't give them the space to critically think because we are spending too much time on the spectrum of telling and problem solving ourselves rather than asking and challenging their thinking to allow them the space to problem solve on their own.
Excellent point. And then the next one is we talk about delegating. Oftentimes, I know that I talk to leaders about who are trying to do it all, and they're frustrated and they're worn out and they're missing things. And oftentimes, if we would just take the time to delegate some of those things, but the thing I really want to emphasize is just not delegating task and work, but delegate authority with that.
Mm-hmm.
Give someone a project and give them the authority to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we'll give somebody a project and then we micromanage or we want it run like we want it ran. So this is part of the of a person who says, well, why should I own this? The boss is just going to overrule anything I do. So delegation needs to come with authority.
Yeah, and giving them that autonomy. If you're going to delegate it to them, when we look at even situational leadership, if they're at the place where you can delegate it to them, then that means you should be trusting them, which I know you're going to talk about trust here in a moment, but trusting them to do the work and to do it right. And by the way, to do it the way that they think is best rather than just the way that you think it should be done, which goes back to your comment on micromanagement.
Right. And then, yes, trust is absolutely important. And I made the statement to trust before you have to. And that usually gets people's eyebrows like, what do you mean trust before you have to? Is that oftentimes is that back to the delegation, Michelle, that we're talking about delegating, there's that, we may not know exactly what this person is capable of. So we're going to have to trust them sometimes without knowing everything we would like to know, especially micromanagers or perfectionists and you have this vision. But when you allow people say, hey, look, I'm going to give you the space, and I liked how you put that, Michelle, to give people the space, not only to be successful, but even the space to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes everybody has read plenty of books and articles about failure is where you do your most learning, right? And so that is where you put your trust, even though there may be some failing going on, but there is going to be so much growth. And when someone feels that, an employee feels like that you trusted them enough without knowing enough, they're going to work even harder.
Yeah, and that's where even if failure does happen, it creates the pathway for meaningful conversation, and those coaching conversations as we talk about on, well, what would you have done differently? What can we do differently moving forward? How can I support you? And still stay in that space of ownership.
Right. And then allow your folks to do their own problem solving. You know, sometimes I find this a lot in young leaders or new to role leaders, is that they think they were hired because they know it all, and they think they're supposed to have the answer. Let me tell you, you don't have all the answers, and you're not out there every day doing the work. So allow your folks and encourage them to problem solve, and in fact require them to problem solve. We as coaches, one of the first things that we will ask when somebody comes to us and say, yeah, I'm having a real issue with XYZ, what do you think I should do? The first thing that's going to come out of our mouths as coaches, well, what do you think you should do?
Right.
And because that is where, when people know that there is confidence in them, or that there's not going to be someone there problem solving for them, and they realize, oh, I'm going to have to figure this out on my own, then that ownership starts kicking in.
Well, and thinking about how all of these intertwine and interconnect, that it's hard for your employees or your team members to figure out the how if they are not engaging in the problem solving piece.
Right.
So
Right.
they definitely each build one precept and concept on the next.
All right. So one of the things that that people might say, well, I do this, but I am a huge advocate for ongoing feedback. You know, many organizations and companies have, you know, once a year, or maybe twice at the most, and sometimes never, what they refer to as performance reviews or feedback sessions. I want to really emphasize, if you want people to own their work and own being part of the company, is to give constant ongoing feedback. Don't wait at the performance review time to say, oh, 3 months ago when you did X, I really wish you'd
or
done.
9 months ago.
Yes.
Because when
Or
they're
last
annual
year.
reviews.
Yeah. So that ongoing feedback is extremely important. And one of the things Gallup said is one of the key factors that highly engaged employees said that they had, that they had received ongoing feedback from their boss, and that kept them engaged.
And one of the things we know with the research, because just a few months ago we did a webinar on millennials, and one of the things that they are asking for is more feedback. And you know, it's a lot of people are saying, oh, the millennials just want feedback. I think that it's just that they have found a voice. I think everybody wants feedback. And Joanna, if I can just build her on this, I think it's really important that we clarify something, that feedback is not just developmental, that it needs to be both supportive and encouraging feedback as well as developmental feedback. And in fact, most recent research shows a 4-to-1 ratio, that we need 4 positive pieces of feedback to every 1 developmental piece of feedback in order for our brains just to think that it is all fair and even. So leaders, team members, you know, whoever you're giving feedback to, remember that ratio of both positive and developmental, and remember to throw out the feedback sandwich. If you're going to give positive feedback and let it sit and leave it alone. If you're going to give developmental feedback, then give that and let it sit and leave it alone. Not this positive, negative, positive, because people leave frustrated and confused. And it's hard to take ownership of something you're frustrated and confused about.
That's such good advice, and I echo that. Is that feedback? For many people, feedback is, what are you doing wrong? Feedback needs to be more often, what are you doing right?
That's right. Because we want to reinforce those neurological pathways. What are you doing right? And I want you to do that again. Well, how are we most likely to do that? If you tell us, if you tell me that it's right and it's good and it happened, then I want to do it again.
Right. And then one of our steps is to acknowledge.
Yes.
And now acknowledge is different from giving a compliment. You know, I've had plenty of people come by and it's like, oh, great job today, Joanne. I'm like, great job at what? Doing what?
Right.
Yeah, right.
Great job yesterday in the meeting. Huh? Yeah. There were 4 meetings yesterday. Which one?
So acknowledgement is very specific. And this is another thing that Gallup found, is that when employees are acknowledged about very specific contributions to what to what they're doing in the workplace, that inspires them to own. So let me give you an example of acknowledging someone. For instance, Michelle and I sometimes co-facilitate a class. And Michelle and I facilitate a little bit differently, as you would expect. And one of the things I've always admired about Michelle in a class is her ability to literally flex her style to what's going on in front of her, or flex where the class needs to go. So here's my acknowledgement to Michelle. Is like, Michelle, first of all, I love facilitating with you. It's always fun. You make it fun for us, and you make it fun for the class. And one particular thing that I noticed that you do exceedingly well is recognizing at that moment where you need, or the class needs to shift to something that's come up in the classroom. I know you prepare, you sometimes even over prepare, but you are amazing at being able to recognize those moments. What is a teachable moment for that? And I want to first thank you for that, but also to let you know that it always inspires me to be in the moment, and that to remember, and this is what I know about you, is that the class is about them and not about us. And I see that in everything you do.
Wow. So, by the way, you guys, I didn't know I was going to get that compliment. So now that I'm feeling really, really proud. And by the way, that makes me want to do that more.
Yeah.
To have it recognized, because sometimes we just do things and we don't even realize that they're appreciated or they're happening. So that's a pretty cool moment, and I'm smiling from ear to ear, and I hadn't even expected that. So thank you. So you guys got to see that right here in real life.
Right. Remember, acknowledge it is specific, timely, and relevant. So keep that in mind. So let's review the, I think all of them should pop back up, is that here are the steps that we just talked about. Communicate the mission and vision, involve everyone in goal setting and planning. Don't forget to explain the why, and let them choose the how to get it done. And delegate not just work, but authority to get the work done. Trust before you have to. Encourage others to problem solve. Encourage your folks to be problem solvers, and then give that constant constructive feedback. And please acknowledge. So I'd like to ask the group a question, Michelle, is take a look at this list, and which one of those are you that's calling your name and saying to you, I need to work on that. So I'd just like to hear comments from the group.
And what we're going to ask you to do is just type those in. Everybody's in private mode, and we're not going to share those results, what you're typing in. But what happens here is you take your commitment to a whole different level when you first and foremost think about what it is that you want to work on. And then second of all, when you actually write it down and share it. Now, some of you on here are people that we coach with, that we work with. Some of you are not, but it still is creating that whole space of accountability because you're putting it out there. So Joanne, I'm going to share my own, and I'm going to put it out there. And you know, one of the ones I want to work on more this year is encouraging them to problem solve. I know that I can get in a hurry, and it's easy when I'm asked a question just to answer, here's what needs to be done and here's how it needs to be done, even though I know in my head that that's not the best thing to do. So I'm really going to commit this year and over the next few weeks, so I create those new pathways of doing things, is asking questions and allowing them to problem solve it on their own rather than doing it for them. That whole thing I talk about a lot, when I go slow, I go fast.
Right.
So slow down to let them problem solve and get more engaged.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And there's several of you that have responded. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you. And keep them coming in, please. Yeah, because and this isn't for us as much as it is for you.
Right.
To have that coming in. So
yeah.
Thank you for sharing what it is that you want to work on this year.
So the final step in this whole list of what needs to be done is one I saved for the last, specifically for a reason. You'll see that is to hold your employees and hold your team accountable
And yourself.
and be accountable.
That's right.
You know, accountability, folks, is not a four-letter word. It really isn't. And I think, I know Michelle will agree with me. We get asked more often than, this is the question that gets asked of us more often than other questions. How do I hold people accountable? They just don't do their job, or, you know, I'm not doing what I know to do. Accountability is something that that we as leaders, first of all, I believe will determine the success of your leadership and the success of your organization, is your ability to hold yourself accountable and hold others accountable. And for the sake of time, we can't teach the whole class. We actually have classes. We actually have a workshop on accountability,
right,
and what that looks like. But just quickly, is one, a person cannot be held accountable for something that there has never been an expectation set for them,
or even a commitment to
Yes.
the expectation. Yeah.
So as you know, set the expectations, ask for the commitment. Have ongoing conversations. That's where feedback comes in. Is like, if they know there's going to be feedback about what they're doing and not doing, that's part of the accountability. So for those of you that you know, wrote one of the steps you're going to take a look at and work on, is like, I want you to ask yourself, how are you going to hold yourself accountable?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do to be accountable for that? And then what do you need to do differently to hold others accountable?
That's right. And, you know, Joanne, I'm going to put a plug in here, and not just for MSBCoach for what we do, but for the coaching practice in general. So whether you have a coach from someplace else, whether it's an internal coach, external coach, paid or not paid, that's the importance of coaching. You know, we are coaches, but we all have coaches as well.
Yes.
I have had a coach for over 13 years. I am just a strong advocate of it, because it creates this space of sharing what it is you're working on. And the coach's support too. They're not just accountability, but that place of accountability, when I know I'm going to be having a coaching conversation next week with my coach, and I said I'm going to be working on something, they're not my boss, but it puts a whole different level of accountability on me. So I just want to encourage you to create that for yourself. You will be amazed how much more you will accomplish when you have that, as well as your people, when they have that accountability in a very positive way, because they have said it's what I want to work on. They have said it's what I want to go after. And so therefore you're just holding them accountable for what they want.
Yeah, well said. So if you want something to count, then be accountable.
That's right.
So I want to wrap us up today, Michelle, talking about the culture of owning it, because there has, as we said at the beginning of our webinar, is that as leaders, it is part of our role is to create and help sustain a culture of owning it. So I just wanted to share some of some things that I've learned over the years, and that studies reveal, is, first of all, it is all about the leadership. If there is not strong leadership, if the leaders are not living the mission and vision, if they're not sharing, if they're not putting it out there, if they're not owning it, there is no way. You are the foundation of the culture. So live that vision and talk about that vision.
Even if you're not holding space in the C-suite area.
Right.
You know, if you're a supervisor, if you're a director, if
Right.
you're a vice president, whatever your space is, that you are able to help yourself and those people live into that. So I just wanted to take it from, you know, all different perspectives, for sure.
Oh yes, and you prompted something in my mind, Michelle, is that to your team, to your employees, you're the company.
That's right. That's right.
And you
Good
may
point.
be first line, second line, middle, whatever. You are the organization. So live that vision.
That's right. Well said.
And then we talk about this a good bit. We're coaches, so we're going to talk like coaches. But coaching versus telling, creating a culture, and instead of being just a teller, you tell people what to do, when to do it, how to do it. You're just going to have robots.
Mhm.
But when you're coaching people, asking them their input, what would they do differently, you're going to start creating that culture of ownership.
And Joanne, I just want to clarify because I know there are lots of different definitions that people use in the leadership realm of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
When we refer to coaching, we refer to pure coaching, which is that space of asking questions and empowering other people. Versus telling what to do.
Right.
And there's a time and a space for both, but we spend way too much time in leadership in the telling space and not enough time in the coaching, questioning, asking space, which is why we have such low scores on our Gallup poll surveys of people not being bought in and taking ownership.
Right. And then is up your own game. And for those of you that may not be formally leading anyone, you're still a leader. And I want to challenge everybody to up your game. And what I mean by that is that, be the model, be the model of ownership, be the model living out that vision and mission, be the model of the coach. But look at yourself. And Michelle's already put this plug in, whether you have a coach or you're looking for a coach, is one of the best ways to up your game. And we actually have statistics to prove it. Is some of the highest performers will tell you one of the top 3 or 4 things that they always have in their life is a coach.
That's right.
So up your game. And then make it a point to connect with a different person every day. Now this well, what does that mean? Is that when you make it a point to interact with your employees or your team or your peers or with your boss, of every day looking for a person to engage with, to see what's going on. Now, it's not to tell, but it is to grow and how you can support them. What do they need from you? What can the organization do? But making a point to connect with a different person every day is going to give you insight and is going to give you that kind of a gauge on where the culture is and what adjustments you need to make.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that's easy to be overlooked. And that's also, we can't do that if we're leading from behind our desk.
Correct. And then the last one I want to talk about is become a fan of your organization. Become a fan of what you're doing. If you are a complainer and griping and talking about what's wrong with the company, let me tell you, you're never going to create ownership. Mm-hmm. And if you can't be a fan of your own organization, I have said this, it may be the time to take a look outside the organization, but people need to see you as a fan of the organization. And the last one, because one of my strengths is to believe. Mm-hmm. Believe in the best in people. Believe that people want to be there. Believe that the organization wants to do well. Believe in yourself.
Yeah. Joanne, I just want to add something to that about becoming a fan, because you had said, if you're not and you can't find that anymore, it may be time to look outside the organization. Just, that's okay too.
Right.
There is time for change. And sometimes it doesn't make you wrong, them wrong. It's just time for change.
Right.
And recognizing that as well and owning that and embracing it for yourself. Because remember, you cannot change anyone else but yourself.
Absolutely. Well said. So we're coming fast approaching the end, and we wanted to give opportunity for any questions or any comments that anyone out there has.
And so, Joanne, I'm just going to say it that because we are out of time, I'm going to share our email addresses here in just a moment. So please, if you have any questions, type those in, send them in to us. I promise you, we will write you back personally. Yes. And some of you will be watching this recording. We're doing it live right now, but a lot of people, check them out later. Please, even if it's several months later, a year later, send us your questions. We want to have conversations with you and we want to engage with you. So as we wrap up, just reminding you to check out our books on Amazon. We're pretty pleased with those and proud of those and hope that you have the opportunity to enjoy them as well. Also, all of the new and exciting things we have coming up this year in 2018. We'd love your feedback on the new things that we're doing. We talked a lot today about feedback, but in order to have that feedback, we need you to join us. So watch for the Facebook Live coming. They're coming on Thursdays. I think it's the third Thursday of every month, but just watch your newsletter for that or check out our website. Also check out our Millennial Coaches. Just a lot of neat new things, really building up our YouTube channel as well. So we hope that you're able to join us and give us feedback in all of these places. So here on this last screen, I'm going to leave up for a few moments. You have Joanne's contact information, just our administrative contact information, which is info@msbcoach.com. You can check out more information on our website, see us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We'd love to connect with you and keep the conversation going in all of those places. So I want to say, first of all, to all of you, thank you again for joining us today. I hope this was everything you hoped it would be. We enjoyed doing it. Joanne, again, always great to be in your space, and thank you for your contribution. I appreciate it.
And I want to say to the folks out there is that my greatest desire for you is 2018 be the best year yet.
That's right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.